I'd be willing to bet that you need an emotional detox. What's that? You've never heard of cleansing your emotional pathways? Well, good for you. Sherianna Boyle is the best-selling author of many books on the subject, and she just happens to be today's guest. Let's go. Sherianna Boyle, welcome to the JAK'ed podcast. It is so good to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You are an expert in emotional wellness, and in my line of work, dealing with people that need to lose weight and things like that, most of the time people don't realize just how important your emotional state is to your physical state. And that's why I love to have people like you on the show, because it helps to draw the lines and connect the dots so people get a better understanding of what it is that's going on. So now, with that being said, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your story, how you got involved in doing what you do?
Sure. So I've been in the field of mental health for I actually went to school for it, and I worked in the school system as a school psychologist for a long time. And then I started to delve into the mind-body world, looking for alternatives like a lot of people, and of how to handle anxiety, depression. I'd been working with a lot of people that were dealing with that, children, families that were feeling overwhelmed. And I too, like a lot of people, was also feeling overwhelmed and anxious. And a lot of times when you go to the medical, to the doctor, they suggest medication. And that was the case for me. Not always, but many times.
Right.
And I tried that route for a while. I tried it multiple different medications. And then eventually my body just wasn't doing well with it. So it kind of forced me to look into this field, which I was already kind of interested anyway. And then fast forward, I ended up leaving my job. And I started writing, and I wrote a book really about if I were to go back into that position, how would I live my life differently? What would I do differently? How would I handle the situations? And it wasn't just me. I wrote it from a standpoint of looking at the job and the intensity that I was in. How could we all function a little differently? How could we all be able to leave work not feeling so wound up and stressed? Right. So we have to go to sleep with all our problems and the wear and tear on our bodies. So then I started to write, and eventually started teaching psychology, which is what I do now. I have a practice called emotional detox coaching. So I have a few things that I do, but they really all come under that umbrella of how emotions can support our mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're spot on. One of the things that has struck me over the years in my journey is, I follow a lot of people. I listen to a lot of people. I'm like a sponge. I'm forever learning different things. And one of my favorite mentors is Tony Robbins. And he talks about how the emotional state has such a direct effect on the physical state. But in reverse, if you change your physiology, if you change what you're doing with your body, you can actually change your emotions in the process. And I just find it so fascinating how all of this stuff is connected. So now, with that being said, I mean, you have the business emotional detox coaching. What exactly is an emotional detox?
Sure. Well, I asked that same question when I wrote the book. I wrote Emotional Detox, and that was my focus. Was I felt like people were kind of touching on it and maybe giving tips for it. Right. But what I really wanted to offer people was like a foundation. And part of the reason was I realized I needed more of a foundation in this. It's one thing to receive some ideas about emotional detox, but what's it all based on is what that core book is about, emotional detox. And here's the mindset. It's based on all your emotions are good
Mm-hmm.
so long as you process them.
Right.
All your emotions are good so long as you process it. So no more good, bad, right, wrong, better, worse emotions. They're all good as long as we process them. When we don't process our emotions, that's when it leads to imbalances in the body and mental imbalances in the mind. So that's sort of the one of the base layers of that book. And the other thing that book is about is our emotions are not the problem. A lot of times many people have this idea that they somehow have to manage or control or get rid of that feeling. And
Right.
that's not actually what we're doing. What we're doing is releasing the reactions so the feelings, the emotions can be fully processed, just like your food.
Right.
Just like you want your body
Mm-hmm.
to digest things and
Yeah.
absorb the nutrients,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same thing with our emotions. And if we're shoving this reactions get shoved down your throat, meaning you're quick and
Yeah.
you just like if you eat your meal quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then your body's like, what the heck? And you have bloating and you have discomfort and you might be like, oh, I wish I didn't eat that. It's the same thing with your emotions. When we react that way, then they can create inflammation in the
Sure.
body. But yet when we honor them and we truly understand how to process them, then they become a source of really of nutrition. And I call it like a spiritual hydration.
I like that. I like that. Spiritual hydration. Now,
Yeah.
one of the things that I have come across just very recently in my personal life, someone who's very close to me had started having some unexplained physical issues, and she couldn't really, doctors were like, well, we're not really sure what's going on, stuff like that. And she went to see several different doctors. And the last doctor that she saw, she was talking to me and she's like, she said, this doctor was telling me that the physical symptoms that I'm experiencing right now could be caused from trauma that I had when I was a child that's been repressed all this time and I've never dealt with it. And he has actually seen cases where, people have even gone as far as to have seizures over the
Yeah.
fact that they have these repressed issues that haven't been dealt with.
Yeah.
It's like, and so many people are starting to realize now actually have childhood trauma that they didn't even realize was trauma. So
Absolutely.
can you touch on some of the things that are generally quote unquote toxic to people emotionally versus, and does it vary from one person to another?
Sure. And I mean, that sounds like a wonderful doctor to be
Mm,
open to that. And absolutely, a lot of the symptoms and chronic symptoms, it sounds like what you're talking about with that woman is when
mhm.
somebody's really affected by what's going on in their life, you absolutely have to consider the emotions. I mean, you just can't leave it out of the equation. And I think that's what you're saying is we're realizing more and more it's part of the solution. It's part of how we help people. And so the main thing to know is the more intense they are, usually the symptoms, that means that you've been carrying it for a while. And you're absolutely
Mhm.
right that trauma, a lot of people don't realize trauma is just a time in your life you felt scared stiff.
Right.
And I think we've all had a moment where we felt afraid, even if we were in school and the teacher's going to call on us. And we freeze and we hide and we're so fearful of. You think about developmentally, we're at that age as a child where you're like the last thing you want is to be embarrassed in front of your friends. I mean, that's a
Mhm.
nightmare to a
Right.
child. these things are happening at, our schools. And again, I'm a former school psychologist, so I'm a huge advocate for teachers and schools. But I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of trauma happening at the same time, because we're not realizing what that impact when we try to control or manage behavior in children, and we don't understand impact, and what we're actually contributing to is reactions such as that child, sometimes they do act out.
Right. Yep.
And that's a way for them to protect themselves, take the lens off themselves, put it onto someone else, get them, maybe even they get kicked out. Now I don't have to deal with that feeling of what was coming up, which sometimes is extreme fear or ridicule, or anybody. I mean, you wouldn't believe the impact I have seen, because I'm a master level quantum healer. I used to do a lot of that.
Oh, okay.
Kind of stuff. Now I teach them. Yeah, I teach emotional detox now. I prefer to teach other people how to heal themselves. I wouldn't believe the impact that bullying and intimidation has on a body. It's unbelievable what happens. So typical reactions are just like that. They usually, like you said, they start young, right. and then they maybe become more adult looking, but they're still the same reaction.
Right. And the weird thing is that, well, I won't say weird. It's kind of given the whole problem. It's almost like giving it a shot of steroids. Now we live in a world now where everything is social media. So, it used to be like when I was growing up, I personally, because I was always a big kid, I never got bullied, but my sister did. My sister was very small, and she got bullied a lot. And back then it was different because the bullying happened when you were at school, and and then you left and you went home and you were in a safe space. So it was kind of a little different. Whereas now you can't escape it. No. People are attacking you on social media and, and everywhere else. And they're, I mean, you got kids that are putting together memes now about other kids and spreading them around the whole school. And then the whole school joins in because they think it's fun and they don't realize the damage that they're doing to the child.
Well, and you also have adults doing it. We have adults bullying each other, really attacking each other's views or what they believe, and it's just really gone rampant. But all of this is it can feel like it's getting worse, but it's always been there. And I think what's happening is it's coming up to be healed, to be seen. It's coming up so that we feel it. It's like anything. You can bury it and bury it and bury it. It's going to show itself. And until we process this of how it made us feel, it's so important that is a daily practice in our lives. I know what I think. I know what I believe. I know what happened. I know what but how does it make me feel? What was that like for me from a feeling standpoint? That's the space for growth, and that's the space for true change and authenticity and vulnerability, which people are so missing right now. That vulnerable, empathic kind of place, that's where it comes from. It comes from love and not reaction. So yes, it makes perfect sense that doctor, yes, I would hook it to seizures. I would hook it to anything that has to do with extreme imbalances. And I think it's patterns, energetic patterns, emotional patterns that just are keep rerunning, that are looking to be cleared now.
Yep. For sure. Okay. Now, one of the big terms that has become really, really popular as of late. Some people use it as a crutch. Some people say they have it and they don't. But anxiety has become very, very forefront in, people say that, well, I have problems with this because I have anxiety, and it may not necessarily be that case. It may be something else. What do you consider anxiety to be?
That's a good question. So after I wrote Emotional Detox, I got this a lot because people were like, I love your concept. How do I apply it to anxiety? So I wrote a book called Emotional Detox for Anxiety. And when I went to write that book, I said to myself, I got to redefine this because the way we define anxiety now is not helping people. I mean, we really focus on symptoms, right? Jake? I mean, that's what we do. We're so focused on symptoms that we forget you can have a symptom without a feeling.
Yeah.
So you can focus on the symptoms or you can focus on the feeling. I choose to focus on the feeling. The way I define anxiety is an emotion attempting to be processed, but can't because we won't let it. An emotion attempting to be processed. So if you think about it, that you can an emotions coming up, which can come up as tension, it can come up as tightness, it can even lift your heart rate up a little, make you perspire. These are emotions that are looking to be processed in you. And if you slam them back down, going to your phone and flipping through your phone or keeping yourself so busy. A lot of people do that. If they keep themselves so off, they're never going to let that feeling in. And the challenge is it's going to come back. So again, anxiety is an emotion or a set of emotions looking to be processed in you. But yet we won't let it. Yeah. And it becomes a struggle. Yeah. And it becomes a little bit of a power struggle between you and yourself. It's like, who's going to win? Right. Your mind or right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's like so many people, at least in what I've experienced with helping my clients with nutrition and whatnot, because I'm very, very focused, not just on telling people what to eat and how to work out and stuff like that, but I focus a lot on the mindset. What's going on in your life? What's going on? What happened when you were younger that put you in the position where you emotionally ate for years and years and got yourself out of control. And it just seems like what holds people back from processing a lot of these emotions is either A, they're just flat out scared to, so they compartmentalize it, they put it in a box and they set it aside and they act like it doesn't exist, which never works in the long term. Or they're just they feel like they're helpless. They feel like they don't have the ability to process and deal with the emotions. And that's where working with someone like you comes in extremely powerful because of the fact that you have the ability to talk to these people and help them to understand that emotions are part of our life. They're a very powerful part of our life, and they can be extremely good or extremely bad. It's all in how you deal with them.
Absolutely. And that's great that you connect those dots for people and even open up that dialogue with them, because I think that's such a, that really speaks volumes to what you provide. You give the whole picture that you can work on the exterior and work on it, but that interior part of you, I mean, how many people do we know that even go as far as maybe getting surgery on themselves to make themselves thinner, and then not too much later they're back to where they were. They kind of missed that piece, that there's emotions in there, and it could be unresolved grief, it could be loss, it could be who knows what it is. What's most important is that you recognize, well, okay, these are the ways, and maybe even the surgery was a way to manage it. Sometimes we do extreme things as a way to manage emotions that are just, we're so afraid to let out. And you're absolutely right. So many people just don't have the skills. We weren't taught. I always say we were taught such a fraction of emotions. We were told what their names were, right? That's the first thing. What do we call them?
Right.
How do they look? And something amazing that we teach people how an emotion looks on someone else, meaning body language, before we actually teach them the experience of in themselves.
Yeah.
Right. It's so backwards.
It is. If I look at it like this, like from my standpoint, nutrition. The biggest problem that people have with what they eat is they don't understand what the different nutrients do inside the body. That lack of education leads them to think, well, it tastes good. I like it. I'm going to eat it. It tastes good. I like it. So I'm going to drink it. And because of that disconnect that they don't understand what they're doing to their bodies, we have the epidemic in the world that we do today. And I just heard a statistic today on the radio. 48% of all adults in the world are obese. 48%. That's insane. That's almost half the world's population. And you're taking into account all of the places like Ethiopia, stuff like that, where obesity isn't a problem. So when you look at that on a grander scale, I would love to see studies done on how many people are suffering from unprocessed emotional trauma. I would love to see some studies on that, because I would imagine that the numbers on that probably rival the obesity scale, if not surpass it.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I had presented so Emotional Detox has a system called CLEANSE in it. And so it's written as an acronym. It's 7 steps of an emotional detox. They're all mindful. It starts with the C, ends with the E. They build upon each other, and they are designed to take about 10 minutes. I actually had presented my cleanse to a organization, I'll call it, who looks and studies the brain, because I'm a psychologist. I love this stuff, and I'm always wanting someone. Could you just show me the before and after? They absolutely love my cleanse. They actually invited me to the board meeting. I was like high as a kite. I was like, I said to my husband, I can't believe it. Like, look at these people. They're MDs and they're PhDs and they're inviting me, right? Like, I couldn't believe it. It was because I had taken them through the experience. And then for whatever reason, they stopped calling me. And I don't know what happened, but it was very, very interesting to me, because I think sometimes we're afraid, because I do believe the emotions are incredibly powerful. And I think there's a fear that's going on in the world that, well, we want to help people, but we don't want them to be able to do everything on their own.
No.
Right? Because then what's going to happen to us? What are we going to have to fix, to cure, to this? You know what I mean? And it really was a very fascinating experience. And that's sort of what my intuitive guidance was telling me. Wait a minute, this is going to free people. And I don't know if we want to go down that road, or it's going to give people more credit. I really believe that they're that powerful when you truly learn to process. The key point I want to make is processing doesn't mean talking. When we talk about what you feel, you are not processing. Now, I always say, because I have a lot of therapists and things like that, that some of them are clients, some of them use the cleanse for their clients. It's great to talk about things, but do it after you process your emotions, not before. 9 years, we have this history of we talk about it and we get someone to the point where they can process. What I'm saying is we need to reverse engineer that, tools for processing, and then have a conversation about what's going on in their life. Because otherwise, we're having a conversation with react. The conversations change when you process first. The depth, the meaning, the awareness, the clarity, the openness. You bring them to a place where they never thought what possible. They never thought, wow, I really do have this ability in me. So that's the difference I want to get clear for people today. In talking, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and I'm going to go back and delve into a little bit of Tony Robbins again, because one of the things that I thought was amazing about the way he approached things when he first started his career, he used a lot of neuro-linguistic programming, basically interrupting people's patterns when they would get stuck on these negative emotions. And they either couldn't process them right or refused to process them. So rather than dealing with that, they would act out in other ways. And it was amazing to me how he would simply take and interrupt that pattern and continue to interrupt that pattern enough times until it got to the point where that person couldn't get back into that pattern. So they had to learn a different way to process. And so much of what you're saying is just like drawing connections in my mind to some of this stuff that I've heard, because it makes sense. If you're trying to talk about something that you're feeling and you haven't processed that emotion, you're going to try to talk about it and express that from the height of that emotion. And you're not even sure what that emotion means yet. Whereas if you process it and you're like, okay, well, I felt like this because, then once you have that realization, then you can talk about it and things are going to be a lot more clear and concise. So I totally agree with what you're saying. That's amazing. I love how when I talk to people on the podcast, I either draw correlations to other things that I've heard or other podcast guests that I've had. You know, it's just, I do such a wide range of guests because I believe that total overall health, total wellness is everything. It is what you put in your body. It's the thoughts that you put in your body. It's the people that you surround yourself with. All of these things are so deeply connected, but so many people don't realize it. And they're sitting there wondering where that missing piece of the puzzle is.
Yeah. And once you start processing your emotions, there will be shifts in your life, and some people will be drawn to you, and some people you might not be as connected with anymore. And that's okay too. And you can lovingly, kindly let those relationships come to an end if that's the way that chapter is supposed to go, or new chapters will open. But the point is let the emotions decide, not your head, not your brain, because the brain will always go back to trauma. It will always go back to defensiveness. It will always go back to survival mode. But the emotions in that processing state, that's when you can really say, you know, I wrote, in addition, after Emotional Detox for Anxiety, I have a book coming out next fall. It's October 2021. It comes out. I wrote 135 emotional detoxes so that people could self-guide themselves through. It didn't occur to me to even do that until and after I wrote Emotional Detox for Anxiety, and that's just the way it works.
Right.
So I wrote that book, and it was interesting because I, of course, did about 100, probably a lot more than that, writing the book. After that, I had some friendships that shifted. And the beautiful part is they shifted in a loving way, and it was a kind way. I remember having a friend say, you know, I feel like we don't do anything. I feel, and this is during COVID, and I was like, good, you know,
who's doing anything during COVID?
And then I remember really sitting quietly and reflecting on that myself, and thinking to myself, you know, what's the truth underneath this? How do I really feel when I'm around that person? And the truth of the matter was that person was a little heavy for me. And I had to put limits in because the energy always felt a little heavy, and it was sometimes too much for me, especially during COVID, when we already have a lot on our plate. So I lovingly I decided, and didn't have to, I chose to release that person and let them know, I love you. I'm grateful for you. I'm just not on the same page with that, with this. And so that was after the point being, that was after 135 emotional detoxes. Things shift, and it's okay. And I think sometimes we have this fantasy, like, you know, these are irrational beliefs. Like, I'm supposed to have a million friends, and they're all supposed to love me all the time.
Yeah, no, that doesn't happen.
So many, of our youth are growing up with that people are supposed to like me. They're supposed to follow me. They're supposed to, and that's, and it's just not true. It's just not true. That's completely irrational, unrealistic. And and people come in and now I have new people coming in. So the point being is your emotions will guide you when they're processed. They will put you in the right place at the right time with the right people for your growth and expansion. And your health.
Yes, the health is, it's like if people only knew, if they really understood what stress and anxiety, the chemical reactions that happen and what they do in the body, if they fully understood that, they would spend more time on their emotional health, and they would spend more time trying to find ways to have less stress in their life. But I want to go back to a point that you were just talking about, adapting from, you in childhood and wanting to have all these people like you, and then things happen. The bottom line is, we as human beings, it's not like we grow up, we become an adult, and then at a certain age, we stop growing. We may stop growing physically. You know what I'm saying? Or, unless you're one of those people that eats too many Twinkies or something, and then you could be growing physically too. But it's like we never stop growing. Our emotional health never stops growing and expanding. I believe that our spiritual health is the same thing. It should never just, okay, this is my understanding of what spirituality means to me, so I'm done. I don't need to grow or expand or learn anymore. I don't believe that that's the case. I believe that as human beings, when we stop growing and expanding, that's when our life has a tendency to start going downhill towards the end. At least that's how I look at it.
I agree.
Yep, for sure. Okay, so now I'm going to get a little personal with you. And if you don't want to answer this question, that's fine. What are some of the things that you do personally in your own life to process some of the negative emotions that you're actually dealing with, not only on a personal level, but how can you help people? Because when you're in a position that you're in, you have a tendency, you can absorb some of the stuff that, when you're working with someone that has a lot of negativity or a lot of stress, you can absorb some of that. What are some of the things that you do to keep your emotional health in check with all that?
Well, that's a really good question. And I will tell you, because more in the healing world, where I would work with people and their energy. And you're absolutely right. I would absorb it. I would go home. I'd have to, it was really affecting me. And I really, sort of started to really process, well, what's going on, rather than just try to get better. A lot of people just try to get better at what they do. Maybe if I get better at it, I won't pick up other people's emotions. Maybe if I have more tools under my belt, I won't absorb things. Honestly, it wasn't until I started processing my emotions, learning those skills. I will tell you, I used to go see a healer myself because I was a healer. I would pick up things. I would call my healer and I would say, literally, I'm like kind of a mess. I feel like I just absorbed something not good. I would pay, because my teacher charged twice as much money. I would pay to have her clear me. Now, this is ridiculous. I'm getting paid, and then I'm paying twice as much money to help myself because I'm picking up so much. Once I started processing my emotions, I haven't had a healing since.
Wow.
I don't absorb people's stuff. I can see clients. I can walk away. I don't feel it, but it's a regular practice. So every morning I get up, it's the first thing I do. I get my cup of coffee. That's the first thing, in all honesty. So every morning I sit with my cup of coffee, acknowledge what's coming up in me. I think that practice of just sitting, honestly, in quiet, silent, you don't even have to go into a full-on meditation. Just sitting and taking a moment and acknowledging, okay, what's coming up in me that I haven't really fully acknowledged in myself. And very often, it can be a lot of things. It can be, oh, gee, this is weighing on me. And how do I feel about that? And so I go through the cleanse steps every morning, and then I do other things. I exercise, I practice yoga, I take walks, I make sure I get outside in the day, even if I have like a little 10-minute window, and where I live, it's cold, and I'm not a fan of the cold, but I always feel so much better after you get out and you've kind of bundled up and you get some fresh air. Drinking water. I mean, in the morning, you're the expert on the nutritional part, but I mean, I'm careful about not having caffeine after a certain point of the day.
Right.
Things like that, because it revs you up and it just puts you on this auto thing.
Right.
And it's really difficult to process if you're just kind of like injecting energy drinks in yourself to keep going. Right. So, but it's just, I do it because it forces me to ignore my emotions. That's why. I mean, I think I don't pay attention to them if I'm just spinning, keeping myself wound up all the time.
Sure.
So I make sure I have transition time for things. I think sometimes we're like the one thing, the next thing. And transition time is so valuable. You see so many people, especially in the healthcare profession, they just go from one, right? There's no breather.
No.
And I don't do that when I have clients. I make sure I can go to the bathroom, right? I make sure I can get a drink of water. I make sure I can get up and stretch.
Yep.
And so I think that's simple things where you just give yourself 5 minutes space before you start the next thing.
And that's the thing. Everybody, the world today is so rushed, and everybody's trying to pack so much into each day that they wind up cutting off their nose to spite their face, because if you don't take time for yourself, you're not going to be as productive. What you do produce may not be the same quality as what it would be if you take that time. It's like I talked about this on another podcast here just recently. One of my favorite books that I've read in recent years is called Own the Day, Own Your Life by Aubrey Marcus. And one of the things that I found most fascinating about what this guy does is he's got this multi-million-dollar company, and he pays everybody every day to take a nap. He absolutely pays them to take anywhere between a 15 and a 30-minute nap in the middle of the day. And by doing so, he's found that the productivity in the second half of the day is through the roof. And not only is the productivity there, but the quality of the work being done is different too. So it doesn't matter whether it's taking a nap, taking 5-10 minutes to go outside. I'm a real big fan of using binaural beats and lighting incense and turning the lights down real low and just spending a few minutes with my own thoughts. All these things, put us in a position where we are more productive, where it is easier for us to deal with some of the negative emotions that are coming our way. It's just a matter of setting yourself up for success all the way around the board.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think about, again, I'll go back to the schools, and I have 3 daughters, and I look at, even with this hybrid model of my daughters, my youngest is 13, and they have 25 minutes for lunch. And I just look at her and I'm like, well, I support her, and I'll make her a sandwich or something, because if you took time to actually make your lunch during that 25 minutes, now you have 10 minutes to eat it. Right. So it's just amazing, these models that whatever happened to an hour lunch, right? Why can't we have an hour to digest, right? To actually, by the time you get to if you're working, by the time you go buy your lunch, stand in line.
Yeah, exactly.
You have no choice but to bring the damn lunch back in front of your computer and eat it.
Right.
And it just, it's so these solutions cost no money, right? I
No.
mean, this man is kind enough, but in the reality, I mean,
Mhm.
we can just provide a structure
Yeah.
and encourage people, you know, take for lunch.
Mhm.
Don't eat in front of your computer. I expect everybody to be off email from this time to this time. I
Yep.
don't expect on here. And it would be
Mhm.
a wonderful experiment in your life to just kind of see how that could help people for
Yeah.
sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Well, we're running out of time. So I've got one final question
Mm,
that I do want to ask you. I pretty much ask everybody that comes on the show. And I try to tailor it to who it is that I'm talking to based on the areas that you're in. If you
mm,
could do one thing that would change the face of how people would deal with their emotions on a global level, meaning
mm,
it would be write a paper, institute a policy, bring forth an idea,
mm.
whatever. One thing that people aren't doing now that you think would make a massive impact in that area, what do you think that'd be?
Well, I'm going to say the cleanse. I mean, I
Yeah,
just like
yeah,
I
yeah.
love my darling. I mean, I've written 3 books. I'm on my 4th book about it. I really
Mhm,
believe in it. I think learning it for yourself though, and learning how to process your emotions
mhm,
and then creating that space, I think it could change everything because what happens is when you start feeling, it's going to change the way you behave, it's going to change the way you eat, the way you
mhm.
think, the way you treat people, the way you treat yourself.
Yep.
Learn how to process. And I'm not saying the cleanse is the only way to learn how to process,
Mhm.
but it certainly is a way that I'm finding very, very effective. And if there's another way, learn that way. But
Mhm.
that is what I believe will change the world, not just the United States, but the world is everybody processing what they feel
Mhm.
and then it everything will just fall in the direction that we're all hoping that they'll fall.
That is awesome. I like that. And I like the fact that you believe in the cleanse. Okay. I really like that. There are so many people that I have talked to over the years in all of these different areas, and people are talking about, well, I promote this or I promote that, and they don't really believe in it. You can tell when you talk about the cleanse, you can tell that you
Mm.
believe in it. It shows through in the way you talk about it, in the expression on your face, things like that. And those are the types of things that I really pick up on, and that's when I can really connect to somebody, if that makes sense. So that was a great
Appreciate it.
answer to that question. Okay,
Thank you.
before we wrap things up, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you on social media, and like if they want to get in touch with you?
Sure. So my website is Sherianna Boyle. That's where all my books are and coaching and all that good stuff.
Mhm.
And I have social media. I'm Sherianna on Instagram, author Sherianna Boyle on Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff.
Gotcha.
And I also have a website called Cleanse, which yoga videos because I teach yoga and I have those available for people as well if they're interested in
Sweet.
that.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I like that. I like that. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Sherianna, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come on the show. I
Thank you.
always enjoy talking with someone who deals with more than just, oh, let's eat this amount of protein and let's go to the gym and lift this much weight. I for as much as I'm a meathead, you can probably tell by looking at me. I love the gym. I love nutrition. But as I have gone through my own journey, like I said before, I've realized that everything up here plays just as important of a part as everything else. So I want to thank you again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, so did I. Thank you.
All right, guys. Another amazing episode in the books. Sherianna is awesome. I love her energy. I love how she puts forth the idea that dealing with emotions is so incredibly important, because it is. And more people need to realize that. So you guys know the deal. If you like the video, share it with your friends, hit the subscribe button, hit the all button, click the Patreon link up in the top, do whatever you want to do. I'm just glad you're here. I'm glad you're listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. And until I see you again, you guys know my motto: playtime's over. It's time to go to work.